I'm Teisha with Shalom TV's News Update. The White House is calling on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reconsider his plans to build 3,000 housing units in Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem and the West Bank. The comments were made by White House spokesman Jay Carney. As you may have seen on IBA News, the U.S. had already expressed its displeasure with the move, calling it counterproductive to peace. On Monday, U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Mark Toner said the United States opposes all unilateral actions, including West Bank settlement activity and housing construction in East Jerusalem, as they complicate efforts to resume direct bilateral negotiations and risk prejudging the outcome of those negotiations. Israel decided to approve the construction on Friday, less than 24 hours after the UN General Assembly voted to upgrade Palestinian status to that of non-member observer state. The JTA reports that Netanyahu, referring to the UN vote, said at a cabinet meeting on Sunday, "The attack on Zionism and the State of Israel forces us to reinforce and speed up the implementation of the settlement plans in all the areas the government has decided to settle in." These are not my words, Netanyahu said, but the words of the government of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1975, following the UN resolution that compared Zionism to racism. Meanwhile, the Obama administration pledged to continue to seek additional funding for Israel's Iron Dome. Speaking at a Pentagon press conference on Thursday, U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta referred to the announcement earlier this past spring that the U.S. would provide $70 million in fiscal 2012 on top of the previously announced $205 million to meet Israel's needs, adding, "And we will obviously continue to work together to seek additional funding to enable Israel to boost Iron Dome's capacity further and to help prevent the kind of escalation and violence that we've seen." Panetta said that Iron Dome had intercepted 400 rockets during the 8-day Israel-Gaza conflict, an 85% success rate. Panetta was joined at the press conference by Israel's Defense Minister Ehud Barak. Panetta presented Barak, who is soon retiring, with the Defense Department's highest civilian honor, one traditionally given to U.S. presidents when they leave office, the Distinguished Public Servant Award. Also on Thursday, the Senate unanimously approved an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that urges the administration to assess further any Israeli need for additional Iron Dome batteries. Jonathan Pollard is said to be in stable condition after collapsing over the weekend in his jail cell. Pollard, who suffers from a long list of ailments, was rushed to a North Carolina hospital on Friday after the collapse, where he remains and is currently under observation. Pollard is said to be suffering from kidney and gallbladder complications. The Campaign to Free Jonathan Pollard released a statement saying that Pollard was receiving serious pain management medication and said, "We are praying very hard and ask everyone to join us in praying for Jonathan's recovery and for his speedy release from prison so that he can finally get the medical attention he desperately needs at home in a humane and safe environment." Pollard was convicted of spying for Israel and was sentenced to life in prison. He marked the 27th anniversary of his arrest just 2 weeks ago. And finally, jailed Jewish American contractor Alan Gross has asked the United States to sign a non-belligerency pact with Cuba in an effort to help move towards his release. Peter Kornblue, a Cuba specialist at the National Security Archives, a nonprofit research center in Washington, met with Gross last week for several hours in Cuba. Speaking to Shalom TV, Kornblue said Gross had several messages he wanted to get out. The first was that Cuba and the U.S. should sit down at the table and talk tachlis, meaning truthfully, Kornblue said, and that Gross had stressed this be without preconditions. Gross told Kornblue that what he really wanted from that first meeting was an agreement on a non-belligerency pact between the U.S. and Cuba, and from there, in a climate of more civil relations, his case could be discussed. Gross has also filed a lawsuit against the companies that sent him to Cuba, Development Alternatives and the U.S. Agency for International Development, for putting Gross in harm's way, knowing that they were sending him into a dangerous situation without the proper training or guidance, and that the State Department subsequently took no action. Kornblue said Gross's arguments in the lawsuit were legitimate, adding they hopefully will result in the type of pressure necessary for this administration to talk to the Cubans and work through an agreement to bring him home. On Sunday, about 300 people held a candlelight vigil in front of the Cuban embassy in Washington to mark the anniversary of Gross's third year in jail in Cuba. Gross was sentenced to 15 years in prison for allegedly bringing satellite phones and computer equipment to members of Cuba's Jewish community. And that's Shalom TV's news update. I'm Teisha Bader.